disobey, which is what I call fortuitous disobedience, right? It's the idea that people who are trained never to disobey will always disobey when we need them to, but never in any other circumstances. You see how this is reliance on luck. But this is not just a few armchair strategists. We see signs of that also in the testimony of General Robert Kaler before the US Congress in November 2017. So this sense of fortuitous disobedience is another sign of our current reliance on luck. That brings me to my second point, which will be massively shorter, which is simply an invitation to assess the effects of climate change and broader planetary transformations on nuclear weapons, as well as the effects of nuclear weapons policies on climate change and climate change mitigations. Ultimately, this suggestion is only removing a blinder which has recently been identified. Because when one reviews the nuclear weapons policy documents of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, it appears that nuclear weapons and environmental change are rarely mentioned in the same document. When they are usually treated as analogous or parallel phenomena. As a result of this compartmentalized thinking, knowledge production and policy planning is done on the implicit assumption that the two threats will not interact. Yet, direct and indirect interactions are conceivable and indeed likely, and must be taken into account in policy debates and planning. And then we get to the third suggestion I want to make, which speaks to the need to cultivate the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but to do so in a way that addresses the challenges that scholarship has established relating to the passage of time and the effects of the passage of time on how we connect those events to present and future nuclear vulnerabilities or to present and future possibility of nuclear harm. This is a visualization of the first challenge. As you can see, older generations have a much easier time identifying Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the two bombed cities with atomic weapons during World War II than the younger generations. The second half of that challenge is the flip side of the good news. That is, the younger generations, when they don't know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when asked, which event do you think about when you think about nuclear weapons, they have no reference point. So to address that challenge, the challenge that for them, every additional year is an additional year that decreases the relevance of that memory for the present and the future. So one way of addressing that challenge is to broaden the concept of the hibakusha to the notion of the global hibakusha and to include the memories of essentially the survivors of atomic bomb testing and other forms of nuclear harm, which simply give us a few additional decades in our struggle against the numbing effects of the passage of time. That's our first suggestion. The second one, which directly speaks to Mrs. Wada's testimony, is to elevate the story of Nagasaki much more than we do now. Because another finding, which you see on the graph behind me, is that there is much more remembrance of Hiroshima than there is of Nagasaki. It turns out that across countries and across age ranges, there is at least a 12% difference in the share of respondents to our surveys which remember Hiroshima and or Nagasaki. Elevating Nagasaki is crucial, also in line with what I was telling you about the role of contingency and luck earlier. Because while the military operation of the flight over Hiroshima can be told as a story of institutional control and military competence, the story of Nagasaki is disconcertingly full of contingencies. As many of you well know, Nagasaki was not the original target, Kokura was, and this became a story about being late, about cloud cover, and about literally a change of target in the middle of the mission. That's a way to connect to the role of loss of control and contingency since the beginning of the nuclear age by elevating the Nagasaki story and then bringing that closer to what feels relevant to the younger generations. So with this, I want to conclude with an apology, because I should have given you way more evidence of the claims I've just made in the previous 10 minutes. And I am not asking you to trust me. I'm actually asking you not to trust me or anyone who claims to make pronouncements that pretend to orient or guide nuclear policy. You should demand sound scholarly evidence for any such claims. This evidence can be found via the QR code that you see behind me or on the Google Scholar webpage of the Nuclear Knowledges Program. And so I hope those few words were helpful, and I thank you again for your attention and for this invitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Benoit Pelopidas, for pointing out just the things we're going to talk about for the rest of this conference, namely the need for education, for the sharing of testimonies, and also the combined efforts of the climate activists and anti-nuclear activists, because that's our next topic. In 1982, 1 million people gathered in Central Park in New York in the largest political demonstration in American history. They protested against nuclear weapons and for an end to the Cold War arms race. In September 2019, 6 million people across the world took part in the global climate protests inspired by Greta Thunberg's Fridays for Future campaign. Today, as the world is facing a new arms race and is continuing to see the frightening effects of climate change, these mass movements seem to lack from the streets. Why? And as climate change and nuclear weapons are lurking as two of the biggest threats to human beings right now, how could the two movements join forces and work together to create change? To reflect on these questions, we will be joined by the young Norwegian climate activist Penelope Lea. She actually turns 21 today. Happy birthday, Penelope, and thank you for spending your birthday here with us. She will sit down with two of our previous speakers, Masaku Wada from Nihon Hidankyo and Daniel Høgstad from ICANN. The conversation will be led by Robert K. Elder. He's the president and CEO of Outrider Foundation. Based in the US, Outrider supports multimedia storytelling about nuclear threats and climate change. Rob is also the author of 30-something books, and he previously served as chief digital officer at the Bulletin of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. So I know that our panelists are in very good hands. To all of you, please welcome to the stage.
So thank you to Ingvild and the Nobel Peace Center for having us all here. We are going to start, however, with a video to help us frame this conversation. The video is from Hawaii, and our speaker is Maya Suerto, and she's an educator at the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and an advisor to the Obama Foundation, which was coincidentally founded by her half-brother, former US President Barack Obama. Let's play the video.
Aloha kako. My name is Maya Sutoro, and I'm a peace educator at the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Thank you for having me here, even if only through video, to speak briefly about two existential threats that are deeply intertwined: nuclear weapons and climate change. Both are human-made, both preventable, both demand not only urgent action, but profound imagination. Nuclear weapons and climate change obviously operate on different timelines. One threatens instant annihilation, the other gradual collapse, moving more slowly but no less violently. But both rely on systems of violence and disregard for future generations. They reflect systems that prioritize dominance over dignity, extraction over reciprocity. They share a root in disconnection from one another, from our ecosystems, from the sacredness of life. And so now they both demand we choose life and justice over fear and control. They ask that we find a way through that is collective. Our mother was a weaver, and I do have great hope that climate activists, peace builders, anti-nuclear organizers, indigenous protectors, economists, entrepreneurs, and others can now come together, not just to exchange ideas, but to strategize and to practically imagine movements that no longer compete for attention or resources, but braid strengths into a single strong tapestry. You here today are inspiring us to learn from one another. The climate movement has tapped into the energy of youth, creativity, and global digital organizing. The nuclear disarmament community brings moral clarity, historical witness, and intergenerational memory, especially through the courage of Hibakusha and other survivors around the world. So now there's real possibility for shared movement building. What can that look like practically? I do have a few suggestions. So let's build mutual aid networks. And these would reduce dependency on extractive systems, launch climate resilience hubs, and organize artivism campaigns that push for policies that connect disarmament and decarbonization. 2, young people, survivors, and other intergenerational community members can organize teach-ins that connect nuclear and climate risks. They can advocate for divestment from fossil fuels and nuclear weapons, because where our money goes reflects our values. 3, together we can build gardens and green corridors in our neighborhoods, transforming militarized and neglected spaces into sites of real restoration and growth. 4, we can join campaigns and create new ones to ratify treaties like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or hold local governments accountable for climate action. Many more ideas are out there, and so much that is good is already happening. Throughout, we must not only speak of the horrors of the past, but also the futures that are still possible. We must mentor, not just mobilize. We must center restorative narrative and art, not just data and danger, not just fear of catastrophe, but also the joy of stewardship, the thrill of justice, and the tools of transformation. So let's act together, all of us, in classrooms and local councils and digital spaces. Our job is to support young people who are already leading, with mentors, with resources, and opportunities to lead authentically. They must know they are not just inheriting a broken world, but also co-creating a stronger one. And resilience is not just about survival. It is also about imagination and innovation and a sense of real positive peace building. I will end, therefore, by offering this question to all of you before handing things over to our thoughtful moderator, Robert K. Elder. As we all continue to think about how to co-create, what would it look like for your organization, your community, and you to do just one new thing today to contribute a single thread to a braided movement, one that is rooted in memory, but also fueled by hope and led by the many, not the few. I look forward to seeing that. Mahalo for all that you are and do.
So thank you, Maya. That's great. So in our pre-meetings, I warned you, like, I want recommendations, I want action, but let's just start about present-day action. So I am wondering, and we'll start with Masaka-san, but for each of you, what are your organizations doing to pressure governments and to inspire people?
Oh, I'm not an expert on environmental issues, like many of you here. So, but please allow me to speak today as a hibakusha, survivors of the AA bomb. Last year, I attended a gathering of people involved in the environment movement, such as 350 organization. And one of the speakers was a child care worker responsible for 2-year-olds as a nursery. And she shared something that struck me deeply. Because these children were born during the COVID-19 pandemic, they had never once chance played outside in their lives. But now with increasingly extreme summer heat, not just in Japan, but all around the world, climate change. Children, including those, are once again being deprived of the freedom to play outdoors. So when I was a child, I don't recall that the temperature ever reached 30 degrees Celsius. Even about 30 years ago, such heat was rare enough that we would express surprise when it happens. It's really hot today, we say. When the atomic bomb were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I cannot give you the exact figures on how those events affected global temperature afterwards. But I don't know that the surface temperature at ground zero reached as estimated 3,000 degrees, from 3,000 degrees to 4,000 degrees Celsius. We humans must never allow ourselves to destroy the history and the civilization we had built with our own hands. That must never be permitted. We must not turn our Mother Earth and all the living beings upon it into an atomic field again, so that everything is connected. Mm-hmm. Everything connected. If we allow to use the third nuclear weapon, so everything will be destroyed. Mm. To say the truth, our organization is not working with the climate issue directly, but as a result of the use of the atomic bombing, we know what happened to the world on this earth would be affected seriously. So that's it.
That's great. That's
Okay.
great. Thank you so much. So the same questions for Daniel and Penelope. So what are your organizations doing to inspire people, as we've just been inspired, or to pressure governments and take action?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, is that the problem of nuclear weapons, I think, for many people is still quite abstract, unfortunately. So we need to inform without also overwhelming people, because the facts about nuclear weapons are searing. You know, it can be overwhelming. We need to inspire people. We need to motivate them at the same time. So what ICANN is doing right now, obviously in this 80th anniversary year, is doing everything we can to elevate the voices of Nihon Hidankyo and Hibakusha, and also the survivors of nuclear weapons testing around the world. There were over 2,000 nuclear weapons tests after the bombing of Nagasaki and continuing into the 90s. Those are also really important stories to tell, and I don't think there's anyone that hears testimony from Masako-san and others that isn't kind of automatically inspired by it and doesn't want to do something about it. So we really are focusing on that this year. Just a couple projects that I will mention. We earlier this year published a online children's memorial. Tens of thousands of children were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Each of those individuals had their own story. They had their parents who were, either, if they survived, thinking about that for the rest of their lives. And there are records about this. So we've worked with numerous people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, including Tomoko Watanabe, who have helped us to tell those stories. So we've compiled those into a kind of an online memorial that's very interactive, that people can engage with. And you can click on each person's story and hear, sometimes it's just a very short fact. This person was wearing red at the time of the bombing. And sometimes it's a longer story that's quite compelling. So that's one of the projects we've worked on. And another one to kind of connect it with people is about the spending. I mentioned some of the spending numbers before, and when people hear about, the amounts, the sums of money that are going into nuclear weapons, which we're told by deterrence advocates are never meant to be used, it's quite shocking for people. And then connecting that to the financial institutions. Many people have a relationship with a financial institution, and in fact there are many retail banks who are investing in nuclear weapons producers. And so through this report, the Don't Bank on the Bomb report, we try to expose those connections and also give people actions that they can do to target their bank, whether it be through social media or in-person actions. So there's a couple of things that we're working on this year.
Thank you, Daniel. Penelope.
We continue to meet with politicians and decision makers and work with international democracy and politics and try to build a broader people movement, inclusive for all. And something the climate movement has done a lot of the last couple of years, and maybe especially since 2020, is work with other freedom fights movements. The young climate movement is a broad network that collaborates and listens to each other and help each other out in their respective struggles and fights that come up in different countries. And we do this because we know that the climate crisis is an interconnected crisis, as Masako said. But we also do this because we know that if we are to create societies that are able to implement real climate justice and action and adaptation, we need to work for societies that are peaceful and democratic. Then we need to collaborate with the anti-nuclear weapon movement, the broader peace movement, the anti-fascist movement, in order to make that happen. And we've also, the last couple of years, tested the legal system in every way we can to use all the democratic tools we can to work for the changes that we need to save as many lives as possible.
Mm-hmm. And I think we'll talk about that in this panel a little bit, and then the next one as well. But I was recently in Chicago for the Nobel Laureate Assembly for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and they produced a document, this declaration with recommendations to reduce nuclear dangers. And my friend Owen, who's in the audience, tells me that is up to 127 signatures by Nobel laureates. One of them, Nobel laureate Brian Schmidt, talked about how climate change and the competition for resources will make nuclear conflict more likely. How do we communicate that danger?
I mean, it's a very real danger, and it only becomes more and more pressing. I think one of the most effective ways to communicate this danger is through collaboration between the movements, between the anti-nuclear weapon movement and the broader peace movement and the climate movement. And by doing so, we can see how these issues are interconnected. And you know, a lot of people working in these movements also do not isolate these issues, but work for them all at once. And I think that is important. And I also think it's actually easier to understand these issues as interconnected than trying to understand these political issues separately. It simply makes more sense. And it is less of a difference between the world we're actually living in and the facts when we see them as connected. You know, what still characterizes some of the most successful freedom fights we know is their ability to organize and lift the grassroots movement and continue its impact on a systemic level. And to be able to do that, I believe we need each other. And strong, well-established movements like the anti-nuclear weapon movement and the climate movement has knowledge of people power that is extraordinary. And if we are able to further strengthen each other by, for instance, see the connection between our fights and the reason for fighting, I believe we might be able to execute even more real and meaningful change together.
I want to talk tactics, and we can start with Daniel. What works and what doesn't? When you're trying to mobilize people, when you're trying to influence governments, what works, what doesn't?
So I think it's really important. I mean, one thing we're really focused on is knowing the audience that we're talking to. You know, we don't talk to diplomats in the same way as we talk to the general public. So we have
They don't follow your TikTok?
They don't.
No.
They don't.
Okay.
Actually, they do. They're very sensitive to that. So
Right.
that actually would work. But they need to be addressed in different ways, because we need different things from diplomats than what we want to motivate people to do. I think if you look at, I mean, many of you probably looked at YouTube or have Googled nuclear weapons perhaps, and a YouTube video comes up. There are countless of videos on YouTube, depicting in terms, extraordinary terms, what nuclear weapons can do. And unfortunately, what many of these videos do, and many of them are kind of animated, I should say, many of them are done quite well. The ICRC has done one. But the others, it becomes this kind of, spectacle, disaster spectacle, and people are just watching it to kind of satisfy some, urge to see something crazy and something wild, something unimaginable. Nuclear weapons are very imaginable, and there's lots of ways of communicating it in more real ways. And I think it comes to putting the human stories first. Like I said before, the people who recognize the human cost and who have experienced it are the most effective advocates, and there's the ones who actually don't just inspire clicks, but they inspire people to want to do something about it. So that's why we're so focused on promoting human stories. I just want to add one thing as well, is that you mentioned as well, a lot of the communities are working on both these issues at the same time because they've experienced the harms from both of these things. So a lot of the leaders in the climate movement, there's a plastics treaty going on right now in Geneva. The affected communities there from Pacific Islands who have also suffered from nuclear weapons testing as well. They managed to connect those issues very well, and it's a very powerful message from them.
And I want you to expound, please, anybody on the panel, but Penelope, but what is the something? Do something. What are the tactics that work? What doesn't?
I mean, one of the most beautiful things that are actually so many tactics that works when it comes to activism and working for human rights and for peace. I think we need to remember, though, that the conditions for activism is completely different in different regimes. And I will point to 3 things today that, in my experience, work. First, you need to find a method of activism that gives power to the powerless, or kind of more accurately shows the power the seemingly powerless already have. In 2018 and 2019, with the school strikes movement, it became a way for young people and children who didn't have the right to vote yet and hadn't finished higher education to use their voices. And by striking, we created a kind of union movement that became really important. Another thing is collaboration. Collaboration almost always works, and organizations almost always works. Organizations are really important in order to make more people feel included in the movement, which is critical. And collaboration between different organizations is also crucial in order to create a stronger movement and highlight different perspectives of the same cause. But organizations are also important to have people who can actually go in and mediate politically. I believe every movement needs people that are able to negotiate politically at the highest levels. And then, 3, storytelling, and this has been touched upon before by Daniel. And for me, activism is about storytelling. And storytelling can be done in so many different ways. Actually, I believe it's best done if it's done in different ways. It's about seeing how the political is personal, and that what happens in society affects us all, and that what is decided politically has consequences for our lives. And I mean, the way Masako testifies for what happened the 6th of August 1945 and fights for a cause, it's so powerful, and it's a great example of how this can be done, I believe. And then, I mean, at one more point, and it's not something you can do alone, but it's nonetheless really important: funding. Because if we are to have more people working for human rights, against nuclear weapons, for peace, for climate justice, we need funding.
It's almost as if you have anticipated my next question, which is, what are the obstacles between these two camps working together?
I cannot think of any significant obstacles, not more than we can chew off, at least.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say, I mean, you mentioned about the resources. That's a really vital thing for organizations. All of us working in civil society in some way or another need to support the work that we're doing. And I think certainly one challenge that we have encountered as we're thinking about working on this topic is, I mean, it's funding applications that kind of include both topics, because sometimes the funders aren't interested in those kinds of linkages, or are not interested in kind of experimenting in that kind of way. So that's a very clear obstacle to it. Another one is just the capacity. You mentioned that the challenges of working in activism today, we're all kind of flat out working extremely hard. You more than anyone. Experimenting and trying new messaging. It's something that requires more time and more thinking. I mean, we definitely should do it. There's no reason not to, but that's certainly an obstacle.
We had big nuclear weapons protests, again, the Freeze movement in the 80s in Central Park, a few years ago with climate change. But as Ingvild was sort of alluding to, we don't see people in the streets for this sort of thing. So my question is, how do we do that? Or is that an older tactic? Is there something that has replaced it? So give us some thoughts and guidance.
I would say that, I mean, first of all, activism takes many different forms, right? And I think there are many, perhaps, additional forms of activism that people use today, including online activism, that were not present in the past. But I think one of the problems, perhaps, that we encounter today on the nuclear weapons issue is the abstraction of the topic, right? It's, some governments, they don't even talk about nuclear weapons, they talk about their nuclear deterrent, There's an active campaign from these governments to disenfranchise people, to make them uninterested in the topic. And so that's kind of been a big obstacle for us. But definitely still relevant. People in the streets, still hugely important. We've been very inspired by the climate movement. Also today, the protests for Gaza and Ukraine, I just saw one yesterday, they're very influential. They're making a big difference. I mean, it's going too slow, of course, but people are noticing and people are wanting to get involved. So I definitely think it's still something that's vital and something that we want to get back towards in the nuclear disarmament movement. We want to be inspired by you.
I mean, I totally agree. It's absolutely still highly relevant, public demonstrations. I do sense a deep feeling of fear and tiredness in a lot of people. And not necessarily people being tired of fighting in itself, but tired because they feel the consequences of the issues they're fighting for. The impacts of war, of living in undemocratic countries, of climate change. And as we have known for so many years, living with first-hand experience with these issues occupies almost everything in life. This becomes reality for more and more people. So I think moving forward, we need to remember that we need to understand as many life experiences as possible and situations, and understand that people have changed because of the circumstances they live in. And we need to meet people with the new experiences they hold. And if you have the possibility to fight for other people's freedoms and safety, do so. Because that's the only way we can open up space and time for all of us to fight. And, you know, ultimately, other people's freedoms is your own freedom, and other people's safety is your own safety. And when it comes to, you know, the climate movement, in 2018 and 19, it was primarily led and driven by young people. And as I've said, they didn't have the right to vote yet and haven't finished higher education. You know, I started my activism when I was 8, and for the past 13 years, I've seen and worked with young people from all over the world. And what we achieved in 2019 was extraordinary. And yet we have seen very little extraordinary change happening from that on a systemic level, the change that we were fighting for. So when COVID-19 hit and we couldn't gather or organize in person anymore, a lot of people in the movement were exhausted, underfunded, and disillusioned. And I think we need to remember as we come together again, because it will happen, and it do happens, that we're talking to young people whose, for the most part, first experience with activism and participation in society is largely shaped by that period of time, and it left kind of a deep and dark mark on many of us. So again, we need to meet people where they currently are, and with the new experiences they now hold.
And so what are the keys then to engaging that public? Is it to give them specific things to do? Daniel, you talked about approaching commercial banks.
Yeah.
Wasaka-san collecting the stories of, of hibakusha. What are the keys to engaging that public to get that result? Anyone?
Yeah, you need to give people something to do. I mean, one thing that ICANN is all about is trying to connect people at a local level to this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It was negotiated in the UN. Most people don't think about the UN, every day, or perhaps at all. They should. But we try to connect it as much as we can. So, I mean, the Don't Bank on the Bomb and the work we do to try to get people to engage their own financial institutions, the ones that they are customers for, is one avenue. Another one which has been very successful, thanks to our partners here in Norway, is the ICANN Cities Appeal. And we heard that the mayor of Oslo mentioned it the other day. This is an appeal to local governments to get them to vote on a motion to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Very, very simple. Most cases, the cities and towns that have passed these motions, this was inspired by local individual activists. It wasn't some kind of big organizational push. It was individuals just asking, their council person, can you put this forward? And what happened here in Norway, which was very exciting, was that this influenced local politics and the positions of the political parties in their local chapters, and that filtered up into the national party, and it actually helped to change the position of the Labour Party at that time to adopt a more progressive position on nuclear weapons. And that all started because of little towns and some big cities as well, but some little towns as well. Voting to support this, and it was all started by individuals.
Mm-hmm. And Penelope started talking about this, and I want to sort of wrap up this, but I live just outside Chicago, and in Chicago there's a very interesting local ordinance. It was put forth in 1986, and it's a $1,000 fine for anyone who, quote, designs, produces, deploys, launches, maintains, or stores nuclear weapons. Local ordinance.
Amazing.
Can we talk about using the legal system and just sort of the pillars of democracy to move these movements forward? How do we do that?
I just need to add from what tactics we can use and how to engage in the public. And I think this goes through this question as well. It's about also taking other people's fears seriously. When it comes to the climate crisis, we will have to see large changes in the way we live, whether we like it or not. And changes can be scary. But we need to show how we meet these changes and the problems of today together.
Mm-hmm. Legal challenges.
Legal challenges. I mean, I think that's very much a kind of a national specific thing in terms of what people can do. But just on the example that you mentioned in Chicago, when the campaigners were working in New York City on this, they got in addition to passing a motion on, it's not called a motion in New York, but something similar, on supporting the ICANN Cities Appeal and the TPNW. They also set up a new commission, a kind of a commission in New York City to review the investments of the public pension fund, or the equivalent term in the US, to examine what they're doing. And that, of course, will take legal, it will have legal consequences later on. On environmental remediation and victim assistance, which is a big part of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, this also has a kind of a legal aspect of it. I mean, people will be able to, hopefully in the future, when a kind of a fund is set up to support these actions, people will be able to challenge their governments to make sure that they support that.
Mm-hmm. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to talk about, sort of to braid the conversation together. What do the nuclear threats communities and the climate change communities, what do they have in common? Where can they find common ground, common action?
I mean, I believe the reason for our fights is common. It's about peace and dignity and safety and human rights for all. I also believe that living life, fighting for human rights, the experience, personal experience of doing that might be common. You know, the loss and the grief and the happiness and the love. And you know, as Masako said, the climate crisis is an interconnected crisis, and it amplifies all of the crises and conflicts. There is few things as harmful to people and planet as war. And you know, the military industry is responsible for 5.8% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's just what's counted for. Countries aren't obliged to count their emissions from military industry. And these numbers from 2023, and we all know what's happened since 2023, you know, and I do think we need to use as much resources and money as we do on war and on conflict and on weapons, on the knowledge of peace. We need to build entire centers and universities for preparing and understanding peace and the knowledge of collaborating between movements.
Osaka-san?
Okay, I'd like to say something about the nuclear. There are so many peace movement, peace workers in the organization in Japan, but they have been working separately. So we needed to collaborate together. So last April, Japanese organization. What is the call of
Japan campaign against
Japan campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and more than 40 organizations got together to establish the
coalition, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, just anyway. so the peace vote and ICANN was including.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the Tanaka-san is the co-chair of our organization. Is the one of the top, and I'm the vice president.
Mm-hmm.
So I forgot that. Yeah, I have been working for that. Yeah. So many organizations got together to. Our first purpose is to our government to ratify the TPNW, but in that step we have many steps year by year. So it's very difficult to just our government makes to to just attend the observer. Observer.
Yeah.
So we have been working with we have every year, twice or three times we have been persuading and demanding the government to participate as the observer, something like that. But they wouldn't do that. Yeah. They wouldn't do that. So
keep trying. To take part in civil society.
We have been keep trying. Yeah. So each organization has different motive to persuade about gender issue or environment and what the co-op and the peace boat and ICANN and Hibakusha. So many. It depends on the purpose of their each organization's purpose, but
to
we
work
got together. So as she said, the collaboration is very, very important.
Yeah.
And
so
I
we
think
have been working there.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me, and let's give them a hand.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Rob. And before we let the panel leave, let's see if there are any questions.
Yes, we
Sri,
have
do you have
a great
questions for the
audience, so
panel?
yes, we definitely have questions for our audience, for our speakers. I wanted to first read a comment from Anhao Bui, who is a 19-year-old medical student and nutrition justice advocate. I'm sure many of us are hearing that term for the first time, from Vietnam. An says, I stand today not for myself, but for the voiceless people dying not by bullets, but by empty bowls. If peace is truly what we seek, then let us begin where peace begins, at the table of the hungry. So connecting a lot of the things we were talking about. We have a question from Im Steneth, who says, peace is more than the absence of war. So as we move beyond 2025, we sense a profound consciousness shift. Is this the right time to explore a new peace narrative, one that includes civic society? Is that possible? Do you think that we are at the cusp of something new that we can try? Who'd like to go first?
Gosh, that is a very big and difficult question, but a very good one. I mean, I think, this is going to sound kind of very, very glib, but we need to do whatever we can to make peace. Okay, I'll give an example. In Sweden, I saw a news piece the other day, and it was a report about peace activism. And what they did is they went out on the streets and they found an older gentleman who was protesting by himself. The whole narrative of that story was extremely patronizing, but also very disempowering to what peace can be and peace as a powerful force. So I think combating that, making peace interesting and exciting to work for is extremely important.
And in a way, activism is peace building in its nature, in my opinion, because you never really know which of your actions may lead to change or may make more people follow in your footsteps. So in that sense, everything you do may turn out to be important.
We also have a question about this. A question for Daniel. How could the concept of the Olympic truce be expanded to include abolition of nuclear weapons? You may be familiar with the Olympic truce. Every time the Olympics take place, there is a goal of having no wars at that time or pausing wars. They are routinely broken. Those rules are broken, but that exists. So what do you think of that as a place to also bring in the idea of nuclear weapons?
Well, I mean, I've just learned something new. I did not know about that, but that's extremely important. What I would say is, whenever there is the Olympics, it stands for cooperation. It stands for human achievement. It stands for many things. Whenever there are these kinds of events happening, it is an opportunity to challenge the sponsors, the governments that are sponsoring such events, to take a more progressive stand and to speak out about it. We're seeing that a lot in the realm of football right now, where governments are being challenged for the way that they sponsor tournaments and what they do around that, and that's something we can also bring into nuclear disarmament activism.
Okay, before we leave, I'm going to ask each of you, including Rob, scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you?
I think I'm a professional 8.
8? Sada-san? A scale of 1 to 10, are you optimistic about how optimistic are you about our future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you are, and go ahead.
10, because we've got
10.
leaders like Masako Wada. So I'm very, very optimistic
Yes.
that we're going to achieve this wonderful.
And from the next generation?
Because I know the power of people a 10, but I also choose to be optimistic and realistic as an active political choice, as a device to use. So, because if we as people in a democracy or all over the world continue to have hope and be optimistic, it's more hard for people in power to let us down, I believe. It's another political tool to use actively.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Masako Wada, Daniel Högsta, Penelope Leah. Thank you so much. Now we will have a slight change of scene here, preparing to present to you different case studies, providing solutions to our main challenge here today. How can we work for a world without nuclear weapons? How can we... So in this session, we shall hear from 4 different speakers who will present 4 different cases on how to work on this cause. And after each speaker, our panel of experts will ask questions and comment. So I wanted to welcome now our panel. They are Raymond Johansen, the Secretary General of the Norwegian People's Aid, Miranda Åland from No to Nuclear Weapons Oslo, and the moderator from our last panel, Robert K. Elder, who is sitting on stage. So I ask the other 2 to join him. I think it's better if you use the 3 chairs over there. Our first speaker in this session will be a nuclear disarmament expert, a peace and human rights activist, educator, and communication strategist. She works with Lex International Fund, which was funded by the previous director of ICANN, Beatrice Finn. And many of you have met her on Instagram, where she's tirelessly advocating for nuclear disarmament. I want you all to give a warm welcome to Emma Pike.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ingvild. Thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity today to share a little bit about one particular tool that I think we all need to be using more in the fight for a world without nuclear weapons. And you may be as shocked as I was to learn that today, actually, more and more people, especially young people, but adults of all ages, turn to social media not only for entertainment, but actually as a source of news. And among Gen Z, nearly half report using social media actually as their primary news source, and almost as many report using it as their preferred search engine. So preferring it to Google. When they have a question, they search things there. And so social media isn't just a distraction anymore. It's really where people go to search for information and to form beliefs, and it's where they meet the world. And so if we want to build a world without nuclear weapons, which I'm very confident that all of us in this room are determined that we will, then we really need to meet people where they are, and that includes on social media. So when I personally first started using the very popular video platform TikTok, as well as Instagram, and posting videos about nuclear disarmament, I was completely unprepared for the onslaughts of pushback that I would receive and just how ferocious they would be. It really caught me off guard, but every single day, perhaps predictably for those in this room, I would hear the same things. So nuclear weapons are necessary. They're the only reason that we haven't had a World War III, or nuclear weapons reliably deter conflict. Nuclear weapons are so terrible that they will never be used again. Nobody would ever let that happen. Or sometimes it would simply be, abolition sounds great, but that is a naive dream. And all of that did a U-turn, actually, when I shared a video of a woman named Toshiko Tanaka. And 80 years ago today, at just 6 years old, Mrs. Tanaka survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And in this video that I shared of her with immense courage and dignity, she shared what happened to her, what she felt, what she saw, what she smelled, and what she heard, and what happened to those around her. And immediately, this one particular video went viral, and it was viewed millions and millions of times, and suddenly, for the first time, all of those voices, those very, very loud voices that were defending nuclear weapons, fell silent. I saw almost none. And instead, people were expressing their deep emotion, but also their outrage. And so many people were asking, why have I never seen this before? Why have we never seen or heard this before? And many were also asking, what can I do? I want to do something. And so that moment taught me two very important things. The first is that nuclear weapons can really only be justified in the abstract, but in the face of the reality of what they do to human bodies, to human psyche, to the environment, to life itself, in the face of that reality, they truly are indefensible. And then abolition actually becomes the only logical conclusion. And the second thing that really taught me is that people are not actually disengaged. It's not really so much that they don't care about disarmament. It's more that people have never been invited into the conversation in a way that feels accessible and human and relevant. And they've never also been shown pathways to a world without nuclear weapons. And so while those myths are very deeply embedded in the public imagination, I realized, I suppose, that most people just haven't been sort of invited into that conversation, which is why talking about this in sort of new ways is so important, because on my social media, I don't just share testimony. I try to debunk myths and sort of explain policy or current events in plain language, and connect nuclear disarmament very relevantly to the previous panel to broader issues like climate justice and colonialism and militarism. And over time, I've found myself become a very trusted voice for thousands of people who we might not have reached otherwise, who are like not part of this conversation already, but we really need more people who are doing this, because what we talk about and how we talk about it and where, and also who we talk with, really shapes the world that we live in. Because I've really learned that our words shape our belief. And belief really shapes what people can imagine, what they can resist, what they can accept, and ultimately what they can act on. So I just want to end by reminding us that disarmament is, and nuclear abolition really, is not a technical problem. It's really a thoroughly human problem, and it's a challenge of political will, which means that necessarily it has a human solution. And so to bring that solution to being, we need to give everybody the chance to have a voice. So thank you. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Just stay. Please stay. So thank you so much, Emma, for sharing that and for sharing your experience on talking about these issues. So I want to hand it over to the panel now to comment on what they've heard. Miranda, do you want to go first? You're an activist too.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you, Emma, for this very uplifting and encouraging perspective of real hope. And very moving how just a simple experience of someone's, witnessing such horrendous experiences can spark this humanistic desire to say, I want to do something too. So my question is, with this invitation that you've given now to the youth and to anyone, I guess, who hears it, who has decided, yes, I also want to contribute, how to bring up courage, because I think, I think that there's a tremendous amount of courage required in order to do that work. So yes.
I think, I'm sure it's different for everyone. Personally, I just try to set the example myself. I think many people don't want nuclear weapons in this world, and a lot of the things that we share are very logical, but it can be scary to say those things when it feels like the opposing voices are so loud and will come after you so viciously. So any of us who already do this work, if we can publicly be that voice, of course, only for those who are comfortable, but in my case, that's something I was comfortable with. And so I feel that the more that I say things, from the safety of my role as somebody who works in this field, that gives me a sort of a level of safety to say these things, and then it makes it easier and easier for other folks to repeat them. So I think by having courage ourselves is the only way. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to hear from Raymond Johansson, because you've used to be a politician before. For those who don't live in Norway, don't know your past, and now you work in an NGO. So you also have learned to talk in different ways, I guess.
Yeah, it's elections going on. I'm not running for election, so it's nice days. But still, I think we have some of the same challenges that we are facing, and that's to really reach new audience, different goal groups, as we said, so different ages. So I want for free some very 3 advices for how to reach new groups, different groups into the anti-nuclear advocacy, which is highly needed in these days.
Let me think. What advice would I give myself? I think one thing that is so effective is a lot of times the language that we use to talk about these topics is overcomplicated. And I think that sometimes, people sort of stay in that higher language, perhaps in an effort to show legitimacy or expertise. And it is so effective to speak in these things in the way that you would talk to your friends about them. It doesn't make it any less legitimate. And in fact, I really genuinely think that the language we use is one of the biggest barriers sometimes. And so to speak about these things in plain language, and then also one thing I've learned over the years is to try and show my own challenges. There are times when I hold maybe conflicting beliefs within myself, or when there's something in my work or some concept in having to do with nuclear disarmament that I haven't figured out how to communicate directly yet, and being very honest about sharing those challenges as well is something I have found is very useful, because it gives people permission to realize that it's normal to face those challenges, and that perhaps we in this room or on this stage are not the ones that have all the answers all the time, and that's not a prerequisite for doing something about it.
Thank you.
I suppose that was only 2, but I'll think of a 3rd, and I'll share with you later.
So Rob, Outrider is also about sharing stories and maybe finding a new language to reach new audience. Do you want to just comment on that to end up?
Yeah, well, and my very brief question is, with so many people turning to social media, a lot of social media news influencers are paid to play. They literally want to be paid to cover a topic. So just for viewers, who do you know how to trust? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think actually Benoit mentioned earlier today that we should all, I think, take up the responsibility to make sure that we don't just trust things blindly. And one of the biggest challenges that I face with social media these days is that it is not an environment that encourages deep thinking, that encourages critical thinking, or the responsibility to sort of do that research on one's own behalf. And so I think it's a matter of all of us as users to interact with the information that we are thrown more critically and make a wise decision for ourselves who to trust. I don't hope or expect anyone to just trust me off the bat, which is why I work hard to share the reasons why the things that I'm sharing are legitimate. But I think that it's all of our responsibility to be to engage more critically with the world around us, and also become more comfortable to be in gray spaces rather than just a pure black and white. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emma Pike. Now we shall move from social media to the courtroom, because not just the use of nuclear weapons, but also the production of them can have serious consequences for human lives. That is why a group of NGOs filed a case against the US National Nuclear Security Administration, trying to stop their plans to increase the production of plutonium pits in New Mexico and South Carolina. And they won. Take a look at this.
The Los Alamos National Laboratory, also known as LANL, is where nuclear weapons production first began. Over 80 years later, LANL is still producing plutonium pits and is aggressively expanding their production. Plutonium pits are the radioactive fissile cores of nuclear bombs. In 2018, the Trump administration decided to produce at least 80 pits per year by 2030, including 30 or more at LANL and 50 or more at the Savannah River site in South Carolina.
The first problem is that the United States doesn't truly need new plutonium pits. Scientific studies have so far proven that pits age very slowly, and the US already has thousands of pits in reserve in storage at the Pantex plant in Texas. Second, no pit production is to maintain the existing nuclear weapons stockpile. Instead, all future pit production is for new design warheads, the first since the end of the Cold War. These new nuclear weapons could prompt the US to resume nuclear weapons testing.
The plutonium pit production and new missile programs planned by the U.S. government are far-reaching and affect many locations throughout the country. In Livermore, California, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory is the lead lab for the development of the W87-1 warhead, which will sit on top of the planned 450 new Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are destined for silos across 5 U.S. states.
With a total cost upwards of $336 billion, Livermore's newly designed warhead includes a newly designed plutonium pit. And these pits will take up the first 10 years of plutonium pit production at Los Alamos National Lab's plutonium facility. Livermore is heavily involved in supporting the pit production plant and is planning to enhance its plutonium utilization, which means increased plutonium experimentation and plutonium throughput in order to facilitate new plutonium pit production.
In addition to LANL, the Savannah River site in South Carolina was also proposed for pit production. Known as SRS, it produced tritium and plutonium for use in nuclear weapons during the Cold War. It is now one of the most contaminated sites in the U.S.
It's a designated Superfund site, and it had 37 million gallons of radioactive waste to be cleaned up. It poisoned the earth, it poisoned the water in that area, and now they propose to produce plutonium pits there too. This is a mission that SRS has never performed in its history.
In the summer of 2021, on behalf of Nuclear Watch New Mexico, SRS Watch, Tri-Valley Cares, and the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, the South Carolina Environmental Law Project sued the Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration for violating the National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA.
The way NEPA works is it requires agencies to evaluate the environmental consequences of their projects. It also, importantly, requires public participation. It also requires the agency to respond to these public comments. If the agency is found to have violated NEPA, then oftentimes the agency is not allowed to move forward with the project.
In October of 2024, a federal judge in South Carolina found that the Department of Energy and the NNSA violated NEPA. The agencies tried to rely on inconsistent justifications for expanded pit production and failed to provide any opportunity for public input on reasonable alternatives. Instead, the defendants had simply decided what they wanted to do, which was to produce pits at LANL and SRS, and then conducted analyses after that critical decision had been made.
As part of the settlement, the defendants must now conduct a thorough, programmatic NEPA review of pit production and produce a full, thorough assessment of a range of viable alternatives. Now the public has an opportunity to scrutinize this project.
This ruling is a win for government accountability and highlights the importance of public input under NEPA, especially in projects that can have far-reaching, devastating impacts.
Particularly in cases like this one. You have an agency proposing to create components for weapons of mass destruction, which in itself can create severe environmental effects. And also the creation of these components produces extreme amounts of toxic and radioactive waste, some of which can persist for thousands of years. That is a severe environmental effect that needs to be evaluated closely.
So, thank you to the South Carolina Environmental Law Project, Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, the Nuclear Watch New Mexico, Savannah River Site Watch, and Tri-Valley Cares. I want to ask you, Rob, if you can just briefly tell us why this case is so important.
Well, I think it's not just this case. I mean, it's a landmark case because you have citizens and civil society using legal frameworks and protections to their benefit, when often it's not. But, you know, and I take this sort of very personally. There's a famous case that just happened. I'm from Montana, which is a western state in the U.S., and the case Held versus the state of Montana, young climate activists sued successfully because the state was sort of prioritizing fossil fuels. And it's part of the Montana Constitution that there has to be a clean place to live. So it's a way for this generation to look out for future generations.
We've had cases like that in Norway too. Raymond Johansen, do you think this is this a new way of activism?
It's definitely a part of activism, although it's not new. We know it from the history in Norway also, that lawsuits can be preferable. And I really comment on the courage that these activists are showing. It's remarkable. And really it's against very powerful interests. And of course, lawsuits, it's not a silver bullet, but it will enforce transparency and public debate, which is often a prerequisite to achieve some goals. So I think this can be really a very important tool, but not alone. It's many other tools, but lawsuit it's definitely can be very effective, although it's troublesome and you require often a lot of resources, often money as well. So, but it's also important, and here is we need successful stories these days, and this is a success story.
And also referring to the previous panel, this might be an arena where climate activists and anti-nuclear activists could sort of meet on common ground. Miranda?
Yes, I really appreciated how this lawsuit and especially this video presents this idea that we've heard over and over again the last 3 hours, that nuclear weapons are not security. They are actually the biggest threat to our national security and global security, but then yes, also a tremendous threat to environmental safety. And I think the power of lawsuits like these and what we've seen elsewhere, you mentioned Montana and in Norway, is also in the spreading of information and education, and the ability to give that as a nonviolent weapon to common people to go out with that information to make change. Yeah.
Great, thanks. We have a speaker now joining us live from Princeton. His name is Zia Mian. He is an award-winning physicist and a co-director of Princeton University's program on science and global security. He helped fund and co-chairs the scientific advisory group of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and he previously served on the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on disarmament matters. He's also a co-founder and leader of the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. He has been a leading force pushing for the establishment of a UN scientific panel on the effects of a nuclear war, the equivalent of the climate panel for nuclear war. He's joining us live from Princeton. Good morning. It's morning where you are, Zia. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for allowing me to participate in today's event.
We are very eager to hear your thoughts on why we need a UN scientific panel on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. We are all marking the 80th anniversary of the nuclear weapons age and commemorating many of the events and the suffering that nuclear weapons brought into the world, beginning with World War II. But one of the things that is missing from the commemorations is that along with the first building of a nuclear weapon, the first testing of a nuclear weapon, which harmed people, both the scientists who built the weapons, as well as the people of New Mexico and nearby areas affected by fallout from the nuclear test that the United States did, and then the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's also the 80th anniversary of an effort by scientists to warn governments of the dangers of the nuclear age. In June of 1945, before the very first weapon had actually been assembled, before the first test, there was a report, a secret report written by a group of scientists in the American Manhattan Project who were helping to build the bomb to the government, warning of what nuclear weapons would mean for the future. And this statement could have been written by any of us today. It said that nuclear weapons are an indiscriminate method for wholesale destruction of civilian life, that these weapons will be a grave danger for the future of all nations. They warned of a nuclear arms race. They warned of the dangers that peacetime civilian nuclear energy might be turned to military uses, in other words, what we call proliferation. And they said the only hope is an agreement for an effective international control that will end the risk of nuclear war, in other words, nuclear disarmament. And ever since, scientists have been struggling to help governments and publics understand the danger of nuclear weapons. And the United Nations has had studies done about the effects of nuclear war to create a shared common sense of the international community about what nuclear war would mean. These studies took place in the 1960s, and the 1970s, and the 1980s. And the 1980s was the last UN study of the effects of nuclear war. And in that study, they said explicitly, we need more work, a cooperative international scientific effort to refine the understanding of what nuclear weapons mean, to explore new possibilities of how we can understand the consequences of nuclear war. But with the end of the Cold War, that impulse to understand more about what nuclear war meant went away. And beginning in 2014, the Princeton Program on Science and Global Security started an effort to convince both the US government and the United Nations that it was time for new studies of the effects of nuclear war that would speak to the issues of the 21st century. Because the world now is very different from where it was when those studies were done in the 1980s. The global stockpile of nuclear weapons and some nuclear arsenals are a fraction of what they were in the late 1980s. There are more nuclear armed states, but in total fewer nuclear weapons. But more places and more ways in which nuclear war can begin. Some nuclear arsenals are increasing, but all are being modernized. The global human population today is 50% larger than it was in the 1980s. And the world is far more independent through trade and the movement of people. And we all understand about how economic crises have tied us all together, as has COVID and climate change and mass migration. So humanity and nature and our understanding of the world is much different from what it was in the 1980s. And we are much closer to planetary boundaries where our civilization and our environment are pushing at the edges of sustainability, even without nuclear war. And nuclear war may tip the whole planet, people and nature into new levels of interaction that we cannot even begin to imagine. So it's clear to many scientists that we need this kind of study. So in 2020, the US Congress agreed to launch a new national study of the effects of nuclear war. And in 2024, the General Assembly of the United Nations supported a resolution sponsored by Ireland and New Zealand and a group of other countries, mostly from the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, calling for this study. And so that study has now been stood up. There is an international panel that is going to begin work this year to study the effects of nuclear war. And by the end of next year, we should hopefully begin to see the first results of that study explaining to everyone just what nuclear war in the 21st century will actually mean for people and planet, so that we have a shared global common understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about nuclear weapons and nuclear risks, so that we can begin the collective process for ending the nuclear danger once and for all for everybody.
Thank you so much, Siemian. I want to hear from you, Raymond Johansen. The Norwegian People's Aid have also been pushing for this study. What do you think it can mean?
First, I'm happy to see an American scientist in Princeton these days, and I see books behind him in these days talking about such an important issue and delicate issue. So thank you very much, and it's extremely important, this UN panel, to talk about all the consequences. And NPA, we have pushed hard for this. I think it's important to show all the consequences. And now I'm also happy to see, learn that Norway, it's also one of the supporters, and it's been pushed by some other parties also in the parliament. And that's important because it was a number of UN countries that voted against establishment of this UN panel. So I'm happy for this support, and I hope that definitely this paved the way also for other politicians to be brave in these crucial issues these days. And now we need it on the top of the political agenda these days, after what we learned also about rhetoric coming out from Moscow, and to some extent also from Washington lately. So it's important to talk about the consequences, and this is important. So thank you very much.
And thank you for pushing that through, Siemian. I want to hand it over to you, Miranda. What are your hopes for the panel and what it can mean in the future?
Yes. I'm the not expert on the expert of panels. And so to hear from truly an expert and leader for coalition of scientists to work for this is so encouraging. I'm so thankful. Thank you. on a related but a slightly different note, it is my belief that that nuclear weapons are, in fact, one could say, a symptom of a way of looking at the world that says it is okay to annihilate another being for one's own aim. And I believe that the consequences, therefore, of nuclear disarmament can also send ripple effects towards the strengthening of a society that is, in fact, based on respect for the dignity of life. And in that way, every effort to strengthen the understanding of the effects of nuclear weapons contributes to a more peaceful world, not just without nuclear weapons, but on all fronts of society. And yes, in that I see a connection between the experts that I have the honor to be around at this moment and at this conference, but also with all aspects of actually, in fact, being human. So, yes, let's continue, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to leave it to you, Rob, to conclude this session.
Well, I have a question for Zia, and that is, in the U.S., President Donald Trump has talked about denuclearization, and he said there's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. But he's also been critical of the UN. So my question to Zia is, then how do you make the U.S. pay attention to this report from the UN?
Did you hear the question, Zia Mian?
I did, yes, thank you. And so I think that, to take Rob's question, the only thing that will make the Trump administration, like all previous American leaders, pay attention to these issues is the organized, informed, and committed effort by people living in the United States and by people in other countries insisting that the leaders of the United States and other countries respect the will and wishes of people everywhere. Ronald Reagan also wanted disarmament, but he also wanted to build 10,000 more nuclear weapons, and he was not very sympathetic to the United Nations either. And yet it took the nuclear freeze movement and 1 million people marching in New York and people marching in London and in Oslo and all over the world to say, no, this has to stop. And eventually Reagan and Gorbachev agreed, something that all of us have understood from the very beginning, that nuclear war should never be fought and cannot be won, and only means death and destruction and suffering. And they eventually agreed. And I think that realization stands today also, that it will take people taking action to make the Donald Trumps and the Vladimir Putins and the Xi Jinpings and the leader of all 9 nuclear-armed states and their allies who shelter under nuclear umbrellas in NATO and elsewhere, that the nuclear age must end. The people must act. And that's how leaders will respond.
Thank you, Zia Mian. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank our lovely panel, Raymond Johansen, Miranda Åland, Rob Elder. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we are moving towards the end of our conference here today, I want to remind us all about the red thread for our gathering here. The stories of Masako Wada and the other Hibakusha that teach us why nuclear weapons must never be used again. In her welcoming speech, Director Kjersti Fløgstad told all of you about how we at the Nobel Peace Center always ask the Nobel laureates when they visit us in December how we may help them leverage their cause. In December, Nihon Hidankyo's message was, "Help share our stories before it's too late." And during the last year, we have worked on this, both here in the museum, showing the Nobel Peace Prize exhibition to visitors and school groups, and by educating young students in Norway and all across the world. And here today, to show us how we all can join as individuals and engage, we will now be joined by ICANN's social media manager, Vanessa Hansen. She and ICANN are launching a new campaign here today. So Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Much for having me. A few technical glitches with my mic. Well, distinguished guests, friends, and everyone joining us from the world today, it's an honor to be here with you today to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This moment is for you. This moment is for us. Because whether you're here in the room or you're watching from Hiroshima, you're watching from Helsinki, you're watching from Nairobi or New York, you are part of the future that the Hibakusha and all nuclear weapons survivors have been fighting for, have spent decades of their lives fighting for. Their survival of the violence, of devastation of nuclear weapons should not simply be a reminder of their pain. It should warn us. It should get us to engage. It should teach us. It should give us a chance to choose something better. So to them today and every single day, I say thank you. It takes unimaginable courage to relive your trauma so that the world can learn. Thank you for your persistence, even when the world looked away. For 8 decades, you've carried memories of fire, of ash, of silence, and of loss. But all of this has not hardened us, it has awoken us. The survivors of nuclear weapons and those still living under nuclear violence, from the DRC to the Marshall Islands, from Gaza to Ukraine, from Kazakhstan to New Mexico, have spent their lives calling for the world to hear them. And as we heard today, their message is as urgent as it is simple. Please share our stories. Tell the truth of what happened to us before it's too late. The Cranes of Memory campaign is our global answer to that call. It's not just a tribute, it's a continuation of their testimony and legacy of advocacy against nuclear weapons. It's our collective promise to them to remember, to reflect, and most importantly, to act. This campaign is about memory, yes, but it's not just that. It's more than that. It's about legacy. It's about action. It's about us. It's about you and I, those here in the room with us, and those watching us from wherever you are in the world. It's about us showing up. Because we are not here to simply honor and commemorate the past. We are here to adopt their stories, to carry them forward into our classrooms, into our parliaments, into the hearts and screens of millions. We are here to demand relentlessly, and I'm going to emphasize unapologetically, a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons. And we will not do so with blind hope. I loved today what I heard about having stubborn optimism. Like the Hibakusha from Nihon Hidankyo, we believe a better world is not naive, it is necessary. And peace is not just a fantasy. It's a decision we make again and again. It's a commitment that we make again and again. And though the road ahead may be long, we walk in their footsteps. We walk in the work that they have already done. They have shown us that survival is not surrender and that hope is not passive, but rather hope is action. So wherever you are, whoever you are, adopt a story, fold a crane, and share with the world a message of remembrance, of resistance, and resolve. Let your crane carry a story, a wish of peace and memory. Let it be your way of promising the survivors of nuclear weapons, I will hold on to your memory and I will carry forward your legacy. For 80 years, survivors of nuclear weapons around the world have shared their truth. And now it's on us, it's on you and I here in this room and joining from home to take action, to not stand still, to not stay silent. We need to make sure, and again I emphasize, we need to make sure that their memories fly and join in acting against nuclear disarmament. Because we must not stop until every single nuclear weapon missile is eliminated from our Earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you. Without the knowledge about what happened on the ground in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, neither we or the people in power can take the right decisions for the future. So thank you for doing this and for informing people. This campaign is also included in our educational tool, which is online and available all across the world. And for those of you who are here in Oslo, you will have noticed that you have a little paper crane sitting on your chair together with the QR code. So now it's time to pick it up and
Absolutely.
do what?
Absolutely.
Vanessa?
So
show us.
If you get your postcard, you have a little postcard, there's a QR code on the postcard. If you scan that QR code, it will take you to a selfie frame, because in a few minutes, after we get the people at home to also join us, we will be doing a little selfie moment and literally start flying our cranes of memory around the world.
Well, for those of you who are watching at home and don't have a crane, Vanessa has a way for you to participate as well.
Absolutely, I always do it. And that is just still join this moment. Share your memory with us and share it as a commitment to advance nuclear disarmament, as a commitment to adopt a story, to amplify the stories of everyone who has survived nuclear weapons, of the Hibakusha Nihon Hidankyo, and most importantly, to take action for nuclear disarmament.
Excellent. The hashtag is Cranes of Memory.
Absolutely, yes. And the website is also Cranes of Memory, as simple as that.
Yeah. Should we
So right
invite
now,
people to stand up?
Absolutely. So if everyone has logged onto their QR codes, we're ready. I think we'll try here on stage as well to take a picture. And so 3, 2, 1, those at home as well. Ready, smile, cheese. Great.
Great.
We have a couple of different sizes.
They are.
Got lots of different sizes of cranes for them.
And those of you who are in Oslo or who are watching from Oslo, I want to remind you all that we have a festival going on outside with a lot of different ways to activate around the issue of nuclear disarmament. And you can even learn how to fold these lovely cranes. So make your way down to the City Hall Square. And those of you who are here are, of course, welcome to join outside after we finish here. You can also print a memory of a hibakusha on a tote bag or a T-shirt that you bring with you so that you can carry their memory out into the world. Isn't that a nice thing?
It is, and that's exactly what we want. As we heard today, the request from the Hibakusha and the survivors of nuclear weapons is really simple. Share our stories, amplify our stories, and we've seen what putting at the forefront the human and lived experiences does. So do go outside and join the festival, and also join the Cranes of Memory online. Share your cranes. And do tag ICANN. I'll be sharing and amplifying everything.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ICANN. And as we conclude the program from the stage here at the Nobel Peace Center, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining, for being here with us today, and a special thanks to Masako Wada for coming all the way from Japan to be with us here in Oslo. And a big thank you also to our other Nobel Peace Prize laureates and all our eminent speakers. And thank you, Sri, for making the digital audience feel at home and together with us.
Yes, they felt very connected to all of you, and they loved the speakers. They really enjoyed and learned a lot today. So we're very grateful for everyone who watched online. And if you and your friends would like to see this again, you can go to our website at nobelpeacecenter.org and go to our YouTube and our Facebook. And please learn more about the work of last year's winners of the Nobel Peace Prize by going onto our website or the next time you're here at the Nobel Peace Center.
I also want to thank our main partners, Hydro and Reitan Retail, for their generous support, and our conference supporters, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Bergesen Foundation, the Outrider Foundation, Lex International, and Scandinavia, Japan, Sakasawa Foundation. They made this event possible. And thank you all for being here, and I wish you all a very peaceful rest of the day. Goodbye.